Hey, everybody, welcome back to the channel. You're listening to the longest running superhero role playing game on Earth. I'm your host, the Game Master, and in this one, we're going to be talking about a big event from DC Comics called the War of Light. And that was when they had all the different colored lantern corps all kind of duking it out, right? Red Lantern Corps, Orange Lantern Corps, the Sinestro Corps, the Green Lantern Corps, the Blue Lantern Corps, so on and so forth, right? So before we get into it, though, smash that like button, make sure you're subscribed, and leave us a comment. We have an awesome community here, and it's all thanks to you. So thank you so much for being here. So, all that said, let's get into it. So, the prologue basically would be a recap of the very last video I did, which was basically Green Lanterns versus the Yellow Lantern Corps, or the Sinestro Corps, as they are also known. And so the members of the Sinestro Corps, and not all of them, because they're all individuals and so on and so forth, but a bunch of them started to kill various Green Lanterns, right? And so the Owens, the little aliens with the blue skin that kind of run the Green Lantern Corps, they had to change the rules so that now Green Lanterns could kill for the first time. So they have a war. And when all is said and done, there are a bunch of Yellow Lanterns that got killed in that war, right? So when we pick up with today's story, those yellow rings are in space, flying through space, finding people who can inflict a lot of fear in others, right? And so we've mentioned characters like Batman and his enemy, the Scarecrow. They both can use fear to their advantage. You know what I mean? The yellow rings are going around from planet to planet, and they are finding anybody who's kind of like a bully or like a tyrant or something that rules over like some planet kind of in the boonies, you know what I mean? Some lesser planet nobody else had heard of. And at any rate, it's giving these guys the all the powers of Yellow Lantern. So what happens next is then Mongul is still running around, and we mentioned him before. And Mongul is, in a way, he's kind of like Darkseid. I would say he doesn't have as much going on as Darkseid does, but he still has a lot, right? He's a big deal. And so Mongul was talking to his ring, and something I've done in my game a bunch of times is, because in the DC Heroes RPG, they give the ring an intelligence, right? So I have people talking to the ring, and I was always drawing inspiration from Knight Rider. When Michael Knight would talk to Kit, that's usually how I run Green Lantern rings, right? So the yellow rings can do this too. And so Mongul's been talking to his ring, having it tell him everything it knows, you know? So he then, armed with this knowledge, because he's not just a ridiculously physically strong guy, but he's also cunning and intelligent. And so he starts to go around to these planets where these sort of bullies and stuff are, right? And so he tells the new Yellow Lantern recruits that they can either serve him or die. And some serve him, you know, and some don't. And the ones that don't, then he starts taking their rings. And it's kind of like we saw in the comics way back when with Hal Jordan, where he had rings on all of his fingers, and that was sort of like the beginning of him turning into Parallax and stuff like that. Now we're seeing Mongul do kind of the same thing, where Mongul's got these yellow rings on every single finger, and you know what I mean? He's getting more powerful. And by the way, this is a sort of a nod to the Orange Lanterns. We're not to the Orange Lantern Corps yet, but the idea there is each colored core represents a certain part of the emotional spectrum. So green is willpower. The Green Lanterns are all about force of will, right? The yellow ones are all about fear. Well, so it turns out the orange ones are all about greed. And they are so greedy, they don't want to share their power with other lanterns. So there's usually only one orange lantern at a time. And he's crazy powerful because he has the cumulative power of an entire corps worth of lanterns all in one guy, right? So the orange ring is almost like an Infinity Gauntlet level threat. And so, in a way, that's what the Mongul thing is pointing towards. Is the more of these yellow rings Mongul gets, he's becoming an even bigger threat than he already was. And then the other thing he does is, depending on how familiar you are with the character of Mongul, he's famous for this story where he had this thing called a Black Mercy plant. And he gave it to Superman, I want to say for Christmas. And because I think the name of the story is What Do You Get the Man Who Has Everything? Or it's like something like that. But what happens is, I think it's Batman and Wonder Woman are like, where's Superman at? Why isn't he around? And they go to the Fortress of Solitude, and he has this plant wrapped around him, and he's staring off into space. And in his mind, he's experiencing this perfect world where like he lives on a farm on Krypton. So it's already kind of a mashup of like Smallville and of course Krypton. You know what I mean? And then I want to say his wife was like a an amalgam of like Lois Lane and Lana Lang, where she was like a red-haired Lois or something like that. But at any rate, like the Black Mercy plants have been seen in the past as giving the person sort of like nice dreams. And they the backstory of the Black Mercy plants was you would put one on somebody as they were dying. So, for instance, if you were in battlefield conditions and someone was experiencing this excruciating end of their life, they would not know the horrible thing that was happening to their body. Instead, they would have peace and their mind would go to this other place. But of course, Mongul, being the cunning villain that he is, had figured out how to weaponize even that, right? Well, so now he kind of does that again, where he alters the Black Mercy plants. And so now instead of them giving their victims, or whatever you want to call them, like pleasant dreams, now they're giving them these horrible nightmares. And by spreading the plants through the universe, he's actually raising how much fear energy there is in the universe for his rings to be powered by. Does that make sense? So, at any rate, then Mongul starts to figure out who the Green Lanterns are and go after their family members. So he starts taking out their parents, right? Especially the new recruits, because a bunch of Green Lanterns died in the war with the Sinestro Corps, right? So now there's a bunch of rookie lanterns who are young and kind of untested and wet behind the ears and all that stuff. And so they fear for their families. So not only is that creating more fear in the universe, but it's also weakening the Green Lantern Corps, right? So a Green Lantern named Sarek can talk to the dead. So he questions the slain parents of the Green Lanterns who killed him, right? So the Green Lanterns hunt down these guys and they all look like the same guy and they're all yellow lanterns. And they kill a bunch of these guys and then some of the others are placed into the science cells on Oa. And so the Owens, seeing all this stuff going on, there's all this crazy stuff happening in the universe. They tell Sarek, since he can talk to the dead, which is not a very common thing. And by the way, again, we're heading towards Blackest Night. And Blackest Night is all about undead Black Lanterns, right? And so this sort of dealing with the realms of the dead, this is all foreshadowing. And at any rate, they tell Sarek that they need him to speak with the Anti-Monitor, who is dead, and find out more information about what is going on, right? So meanwhile, Mongol, who's still running around doing his thing, killing yellow lanterns, saying, serve me or die, getting more rings, so on and so forth, as he is sort of cutting this swath of destruction through the universe, he destroys a ship and he kills an alien male that was on the ship. And that guy's wife was on the ship too. And so she is heartbroken, of course, that her mate is gone, right? And so that gets the attention of the Star Sapphires, and they are the Violet Lantern Corps. Because we're going to be doing Roy G. Biv, right? Red, orange, yellow, green, blue, indigo, violet. So the Star Sapphires are the Violet Lantern Corps. And there's something really interesting about the ends of the spectrum. The red lanterns and the violet lanterns, the rings control the person for the most part. Whereas in the center of that spectrum, which is G and Roy G. Biv, the center is G, right? The user totally controls the ring, right? So then if you go to next to the G, next to green would be yellow and blue, right? Users have a lot of influence over yellow and blue rings, but the yellow and blue rings still have some influence over the users. Does that make sense? So I thought that was interesting how they kind of created this, not only this like the emotional spectrum, but in that sense, but they created this idea of how depending on what rings you have, they work differently. Like, do you control the ring? Does the ring control you? I thought that was all very cool. And I think I said it before, but I had kind of gotten away from comic books. I was really unhappy with a lot of stuff going on in comics before this story. This is the story that kind of pulled me back in a little bit, So at any rate, we find out that the Star Sapphires have been abducting members of the Sinestro Corps and turning them into Star Sapphires. And they justify this because they see love as the ultimate good in the universe. They think that all good things that you could do are an extension of love. And that could be brotherly love, like housing the homeless or feeding the hungry or whatever, or taking care of widows and orphans, right? They would see all of that as an extension of love. They see like when a parent protects their child, you do that because you love your kid, the things you do for your spouse, you do out of love. And so they think that changing someone from being all about fear in the case of the yellow lanterns or rage or hate or whatever in the case of the red lanterns, that if you change somebody from that to love, they see it as an inherently good thing. So the alien widow that I was talking about, her name is Miri, and she's given a violet ring, which then, of course, controls her, right? It makes her be loving. And to an extent, instead of all the pain and the heartbreak that she was feeling because her husband died, she feels love for the years they did have together and, stuff like that. And like she's in a better headspace in a way. But again, we're playing around with ideas of free will, right? So it's a slippery slope that we're on here. But at any rate, so they send her to find new candidates and bring them back to the planet Zamaron so that the new recruits can become Violet Lanterns, right? Also known as Star Sapphires. So because of this, and by the way, if you're not familiar with this, the planet Zamaron, where there's a race called the Zamarons, a long, 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 long time ago, the Owens, who are the little blue guys who run the Green Lantern Corps, right? They were not little yet, by the way. As that race kind of evolved, they got shorter and shorter and shorter. So we're going back so far that they looked more like humans in terms of like they didn't have a huge head, they didn't have a tiny body, they were more normal proportions. Basically, they split along gender lines where the males basically thought that because they felt bad that they had unleashed evil into the universe by accident, a member of their race had. So they felt guilty about that. And they thought that, much like the Vulcans on Star Trek, that like it was because of emotion. So their reaction was then to say, we should be completely unemotional, we should be dispassionate, right? Again, just like Vulcans. And the Zamarons were the women split away from the race, and the Zamarons said, no, you know, that wasn't the problem. If there was more love and stuff like that, that was the way to go. So when they divide up, they're going in two very different ways. So the Owens have kind of a meeting with the Zamarons and they fight. And the Owens kind of say, in the beginning, love might be great. You might love this person you're dating, but maybe after a while, like you break up and you're angry, and maybe one of them actually kills the other one or something, right? Like it can lead to really bad things. And their argument is kind of like love and hate are not opposites. They are both strong emotions and therefore they're right next to each other, is kind of what they're saying. And if you don't think of, by the way, the Lantern Corps as like, don't think of it like a flat piece of paper with the things written across it, right? Imagine if you took the paper and you warped the paper so that the ends would come around and meet, so it was more like a pipe kind of a shape or like a cylinder. Then in that case, red and purple would be right next to each other. You know what I mean? So that's kind of like the Owen argument in a nutshell. Is you guys are like doing more harm than good. And the other thing that's going on then is, remember earlier when I said, certain characters are trying to raise the level of fear in the universe so the Yellow Lanterns would be more powerful? Well, so that's kind of happening with the Violet Lanterns, the Star Sapphires. The more love there is in the universe, the more powerful the Violet Lantern Corps is going to become. So the Owens, who were their own worst enemies, changed the rules yet again, and now Green Lanterns are no longer allowed to love. So you're not allowed to have a girlfriend, you're not allowed to have a wife, so on and so forth. And so hundreds, if not thousands, of Green Lanterns quit. They abandoned their posts, right? And so one of the many Green Lanterns we've had in our game was one of the guys named John Redbridge. And he was married to Felicity of the Omega Men. So he quits the Green Lantern Corps, and then they both become Violet Lanterns. Sinestro, meanwhile, is in a science cell, and he's talking to various Green Lanterns. And Sinestro says that now that the Green Lantern Corps is allowed to kill, the rest of the universe fears them. Some more fear means he thinks he won the Sinestro Corps war. And the Green Lanterns, who are meant to oppose fear, are now spreading it. And one of the remaining Green Lanterns at this point, who hasn't quit her post and so on and so forth, is a woman named Lyra. And she's actually one of the Lanterns who survived when Parallax tried to wipe them all out in the 90s, right? So she's been through a lot. And she goes to a planet where Amon Sur, the son of Abin Sur, who was the guy who gave Hal Jordan his Green Lantern ring. Amon Sur is a Yellow Lantern now, and he wiped out an entire planet. So she snaps and kills him in a fit of rage. So Lyra is put on trial. And the thing is there, when the Owens changed the rules, they were not very specific about the wording. It's one of those things where the devil is in the details. They just said Green Lanterns are allowed to kill Yellow Lanterns now. They didn't say in self-defense or if you catch the Yellow Lantern doing the following things, right? It just said you're allowed. And so that's kind of her argument. Is Amon Sur was a Yellow Lantern. She killed him. The end. She's allowed. Right? And she has a point. And it's not like he had done no wrong. So they put her on trial, and she gets totally screwed over. The Owens, who I'm saying, they're their own worst enemies. I am not a fan of the Owens at all. They just throw her under the bus, you're no better than our enemies, blah, 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 blah. And so that all ends with a red ring showing up because of how mad she is at the way she's been screwed over and mistreated, you know what I mean? And it's like how Jordan tried to kill her, and then, she's had a rough go of it. I'll leave it at that. So she becomes a Red Lantern. And by the way, the Red Lanterns are led by a guy named Atrocitus, whose family was killed by Manhunter androids, who in turn were created by the Owens, right? So Sinestro is sentenced to death, which is ironic because they were just being crappy to Lyra for killing, and now they are going to kill, right? So some Green Lanterns are like escorting him to where the execution is supposed to take place when they get attacked by the Yellow Lantern Corps. And of course, those guys want Sinestro back because each corps kind of has their leader. Like I said, for Red, it's Atrocitus, right? For Yellow, it's Sinestro, so on and so forth. So they want their leader back. But to everybody's surprise, the Red Lanterns then attacked too, led by Atrocitus. And the Green Rings are compromised by the energy of the red rings. And in this scene, we see that one of the new Red Lanterns is one of the other guys named John Redbridge from way back when. He had become a villain, and at one point, I mentioned in an earlier game session, he was ripping the spines out of his enemies and using a spine like a whip, and he was beating other villains and stuff with it, right? So that specific Redbridge is a Red Lantern now. And that's when the Blue Lantern Corps shows up, led by a guy named Saint Walker. And the Blue Lanterns supercharge the Green Lanterns because the effect the red rings had on the green rings was it was like weakening them, right? The blue is the opposite. The blue rings run on the emotion of hope, and they supercharge the green rings. So they, like when the ring is talking to you, when you charge your ring, it'll say, your ring is at 100% power, and that lasts for a 24-hour period typically. So, 12 hours later, your ring is probably going to tell you you have a 50% charge, right? But it always tops out at 100%. When they do the thing with the blue rings, the rings start telling the Green Lanterns your charge is at 200%. So the Green Lanterns are packing an extra wallop now, right? And the Blue Lanterns use their powers then to purge the rage from the red John Redbridge. And one of the things that happens when you get a red ring is, like I said, the ring controls you. It's making you maybe attack old friends, stuff like that. And it replaces your blood so that instead of having normal blood in your veins, as I understand it, it's that force manipulation energy of the red ring. And so, the ring is basically saying, in the off chance you actually do want to take the ring off, you will die. Right. And so the cool thing is the Blue Lanterns, they have all these wacky powers, man. They can take a star and make it younger. So, like, if your star is getting ready to go supernova or something like that, and it's at the end of its life cycle, they can turn the clock back on your star and give a alien race like another million years or something of peace. But they can heal people, they can do all sorts of stuff. And so that's what they do to the guys who are um have a red ring on them, is the Blue Lanterns are like unleash a devastating attack against the Red Lanterns. And they start turning multiple guys there into Blue Lanterns. And so one of them was the Red Lantern Redbridge. They actually take him to the planet Odin. Odin, I'm not quite sure how to say it, but at any rate, they take him there, and they purify everything that's wrong with him. They cleanse his heart, and he becomes a Blue Lantern. The chick that I said they put on trial for killing and she'd been wronged and so on and so forth, they make her a Blue Lantern, which, by the way, in the comics, DC kills her off, and I hated that. I felt so bad for that character. So we kept her alive in ours, but they all fight. Um, and at the end of the day, it's really the Green Lanterns and the Blue Lanterns come out on top. They're the winners of all of that. The Red Lanterns are dealt a massive loss because a bunch of their guys turned blue. The Yellow Lanterns, first of all, Mongul himself is like a massive threat, but he was not in this fight, right? So it was the Yellow Lanterns that he had not gotten to yet were the ones who basically showed up here. So they don't have the numbers to fight all the Blue Lanterns and all the Green Lanterns. And like I said, all the Green Lanterns were supercharged, right? So the blue and green teams win. And that's pretty much the end then for us, for our game about the War of Light. The epilogue is all about how the Anti-Monitor, what was left of him, was turned into the power battery for the Black Lantern Corps. And I will just say this, when we ran Blackest Night, we thought our game was over. It it was so bad. So I'm kind of just warning you, like it is such a downer. Things go so wrong. And for us, it didn't go like it went in the comics at all, really. It was so much worse. Because the thing is, and I say this a lot in the comics, they have plot armor, and in role-playing games you don't. So you know what I mean? Like you have a comic book where it's like Jimmy Olsen shoves Black Lantern Superman away from him or something like that. Like, yeah, that's not going to happen in a role-playing game. Like Black Lantern Superman eats Jimmy Olsen alive, you know? Um, yeah, so that goes very differently. But I'm talking about that too much. I need to save that for the next video. I'm gonna call it quits for this one today. As always, thank you so much for being here. We appreciate you guys. I know there's a million other things you could be doing, and you're listening to me instead, and I do. You know, I value you. Thank you for being here. Um, I would love it if you chose to support the channel by hitting like. Make sure you're still subscribed, and as always, leave us a comment. And from everybody here at the longest running superhero role playing game on earth, we hope you have a good one, and we'll catch you in the next adventure. Bye.